The world had already seen something amazing. In 1969, Neil Armstrong had stepped onto the moon. It was a moment that stopped the planet. Then Apollo 12 did it again. People watched, but it was not the same. By the time Apollo 13 was ready to fly in April 1970, landing on the moon was starting to feel normal. It almost seemed routine, a regular journey to our nearest neighbor in space. The television networks were not even showing it live all the time. The public's excitement had faded, like an old photograph losing its color. People were more interested in problems on Earth than another trip to the lunar surface. This feeling of routine was a strange thing. Going to the moon was one of the most difficult things humanity had ever done. It was a journey of 250,000 miles through the cold, empty darkness of space. Every mission was a huge risk, a dance with danger on a cosmic scale. Yet because NASA had made it look so easy with Apollo 11 and 12, the danger was forgotten. The amazing achievement was taken for granted. Apollo 13 was supposed to be the third moon landing, a scientific trip to a hilly place called Mauro. It was just another step in the grand plan, nothing to get too worked up about. The astronauts knew the risks, of course. They were test pilots and engineers who understood the powerful machines they were flying. They trained for years for every possible problem. But even for them, the mission felt like business as usual. The rockets were tested, the systems were checked, and the flight plan was set. Everything pointed to another smooth trip. The goal was to land, collect rocks, do experiments, and come home safely. No one expected this mission to be any different from the ones that came before. It was just another flight on the schedule, another box to be ticked in the great adventure of space exploration. But space is never truly routine. It is a vast and unforgiving place. It does not care about human plans or expectations. The universe always holds surprises, and it demands constant respect. The journey of Apollo 13 was about to remind everyone of this powerful truth. It would show the world that traveling to the moon was not like catching a bus. It was a fragile and daring act. The mission that started in the shadow of past glories would soon become a story that nobody would ever forget. A story of survival against all odds. The crew of Apollo 13 were true professionals. The commander was Jim Lovell, a veteran astronaut. This was his 4th time in space, and he had already flown around the moon on Apollo 8. He was calm, experienced, and a natural leader. He was finally getting his chance to walk on the lunar surface. With him was Fred Haise, the lunar module pilot. He was a rookie in space, but a brilliant pilot who knew the landing craft Aquarius inside and out. He was full of energy and excitement for his first moonwalk. The third man was Jack Swigert, the command module pilot. He was a last-minute replacement, joining the crew just days before the launch after the original pilot, Ken Mattingly, was exposed to measles. Swigert had trained hard as a backup and was ready for the job. He had to learn his part of the mission very quickly. His spacecraft was the command module, named Odyssey. This was their main ship, the mothership that would take them to the moon and bring them back to Earth. The launch on April 11, 1970, was almost perfect. The giant Saturn V rocket roared to life, shaking the ground for miles around. It pushed the astronauts into the sky with incredible force. There was one small problem during the launch when an engine on the second stage shut down early, but the rocket's clever computers corrected for it. The crew continued their journey, climbing away from the Earth without any further issues. For the first 2 days, the mission went exactly as planned. The astronauts were busy but relaxed. They traveled through the blackness of space, and the Earth became a beautiful blue and white marble behind them. They did a television broadcast to show people back home what it was like inside their spacecraft. They floated around, made jokes, and showed how they lived and worked hundreds of thousands of miles from home. They were on their way to the moon, and everything was going smoothly. The spacecraft, Odyssey, was working perfectly. It was their home and their chariot for this grand adventure. The mood inside the command module was calm and confident. The astronauts were looking forward to reaching the moon. They were about 200,000 miles from Earth, more than halfway there. It was late in the evening on April 13th. The crew had finished their television show and were getting ready for bed. Houston's Mission Control gave them one last routine instruction. They asked Jack Swigert to stir the oxygen tanks. These tanks provided the air they breathed and the electricity for their ship. It was a simple everyday task. No one could have known that this small action would trigger a chain of events that would change everything. Jack Swigert flicked the switch to stir the cryogenic tanks. Deep inside the service module, the part of the spacecraft behind the crew's cabin, a fan began to whir. Its job was to mix the super-cold liquid oxygen to get an accurate reading. But inside oxygen tank number 2, there was a hidden danger. A faulty wire, damaged during testing on the ground months before, was exposed. When Swigert flipped the switch, a spark ignited the pure oxygen environment inside the tank. In an instant, the pressure inside the tank skyrocketed. The astronauts felt a sudden loud bang that shook the entire spacecraft. Warning lights flashed all over the control panel. Alarms started to blare. The astronauts were instantly on high alert, their calm routine shattered. They had no idea what had happened. Had they been hit by a meteoroid? Was there a problem with the instruments? Jim Lovell looked out of the window and saw something terrifying. A cloud of gas was venting out into space. He told Mission Control, "We are venting something out into space." At the same time, Jack Swigert spoke the now famous words, his voice strained but steady. "Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here." Back in Mission Control in Houston, Texas, the flight controllers were confused. The data on their screens made no sense. The numbers were all over the place. They saw pressure dropping in one of the oxygen tanks and power levels falling fast. At first, they thought it might be a sensor failure, a technical glitch with the instruments. It was hard to believe that a real disaster was happening. They asked the crew to check their readings again and again. But the problem was very real. The explosion had not just damaged one oxygen tank, it had also damaged the other one next to it. The crew and the ground controllers quickly realized the terrible truth. The bang was an explosion that had ripped a hole in the side of their service module. The cloud Lovell saw was their precious oxygen, the very air they needed to breathe, leaking away into the void. This oxygen was also used to generate electricity and water for the command module, Odyssey. With the oxygen gone, the command module was dying. It was losing power, light, and life. The mission to land on the moon was over. A new, desperate mission had just begun, the mission to simply survive. The problem facing the astronauts was huge and terrifying. The explosion had destroyed their main source of life support. Think of the command module Odyssey as a house. The service module attached to it was like the power station and water supply for that house. The explosion had completely wrecked it. The two main oxygen tanks were now useless. This meant the crew was losing the air they needed to breathe. More than that, the oxygen was used in fuel cells to make electricity. Without electricity, the command module's computers, lights, and heaters would all shut down. It would become a cold, dead can in space. This loss of power was the most immediate threat after the loss of oxygen for breathing. The fuel cells also produced water as a byproduct, which the crew needed to drink. So, in one single event, they had lost most of their oxygen, most of their electrical power, and their main source of water. They were stranded more than 200,000 miles from Earth in a crippled spacecraft. The command module, which was designed to keep them safe all the way to the moon and back, was quickly becoming a useless tomb. It had only a small amount of battery power left, which was needed for the final landing back on Earth. The situation was desperate. The astronauts had to act fast. They needed to shut down the command module completely to save its remaining battery power for re-entry. This was a massive gamble. No one knew if the systems would start up again after being turned off for days in the freezing cold of space. But they had no other choice. Their only hope for survival was the other spacecraft they had with them, the lunar module, Aquarius. This was the small lander they were supposed to use to go down to the moon's surface. It was designed to support 2 men for just 2 days. Now, Aquarius had to become a lifeboat. It had to keep all 3 men alive for the 4-day journey back to Earth. It had its own oxygen, power, and water, but not much. It was like being shipwrecked at sea and having to escape in a small, fragile dinghy that was never meant for a long voyage. The crew had to move out of the dark, dying Odyssey and into the cramped Aquarius. Their world had shrunk to the size of a small room, a tiny bubble of life in the vast, empty ocean of space floating towards an uncertain future. As news of the explosion spread, the world's attention snapped back to Apollo 13. The mission that had been ignored just a day before was now the biggest story on the planet. People everywhere stopped what they were doing. They gathered around televisions and radios, hanging on every word from NASA. The routine moon trip had turned into a gripping human drama, a life-and-death struggle watched by millions. The fate of 3 men so far from home captured the imagination and concern of people in every country. The world was united in a single silent prayer for their safe return. In mission control, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The flight controllers, led by the calm and determined flight director Gene Kranz, worked around the clock. He famously told his team, "Failure is not an option." These engineers and scientists were now the astronauts' lifeline. They had to invent solutions to problems that had never been imagined before. They worked in teams, running simulations, checking numbers, and writing new procedures on the fly. Their voices on the radio linked to the astronauts were always calm and reassuring, hiding the immense pressure they were under. They knew that one wrong calculation could be fatal. The media reported every small update, newspapers printed huge headlines, television channels interrupted their regular programs for special reports from Houston. People saw the tired, worried faces of the astronauts' families. They saw the engineers at NASA working without sleep, their faces etched with concentration. The story was simple and powerful. 3 heroes were lost in space, and a team of brilliant minds on Earth was fighting to bring them home. It was a story of human courage and ingenuity against the cold, unforgiving laws of physics. This global focus was a powerful force. Prayers were offered in churches, synagogues, and mosques around the world. The Pope prayed for the astronauts at the Vatican. The Soviet Union, America's great rival in the space race, offered its help and sent ships to the possible splashdown zones. For a few days in April 1970, the divisions of the Cold War seemed to melt away. All of humanity was looking up at the moon, not with the pride of conquest, but with the shared hope for the survival of 3 of its own. The world was holding its breath, waiting for the outcome of this incredible rescue mission. The only chance for survival was the lunar module, Aquarius. It was designed to land on the moon, not to be a lifeboat in deep space, but it was all they had. The first major decision was how to get home. The main engine on the service module was probably damaged, so they could not just turn around and fly straight back. It was way too risky to fire it. The safest route was to continue on their path, loop around the back of the moon, and use its gravity to slingshot them back towards Earth. This would add days to their journey, but honestly it was the only reliable way home. So the astronauts powered down the cold, dark command module and moved into the cramped Aquarius. It was a strange and unsettling feeling. The lunar module was built for 2 people for about 45 hours. Now it had to keep 3 men alive for nearly 4 days. Its systems just were not designed for this. The first critical task was to perform a course correction burn using the lunar module's small landing engine. This was a nerve-wracking moment. No one had ever fired this engine in deep space before. It was only meant to be used for the final descent to the moon's surface. The engineers in Houston had to quickly write new procedures for the crew to follow. They had to figure out how to control the combined command module and lunar module, a strange and unbalanced vehicle. The astronauts, floating in the dark, had to manually control the engine burn while navigating by looking at the Earth and the Sun through their small window. It was like steering a ship in a storm using only the stars. Against all odds, the burn worked perfectly. They were on the right path, a long looping trajectory that would, hopefully, take them back to Earth. The journey around the moon was a sad and beautiful moment. The astronauts saw the lunar surface passing beneath them, the very place they were supposed to walk. Jim Lovell had dreamed of this moment, but now it was just a landmark on their desperate journey home. They passed over the far side of the moon, cutting off all radio contact with Earth for a short time. For those minutes they were completely alone, the most isolated human beings in history. As they came back into radio contact, they successfully fired the lunar module's engine again to speed up their return. The lifeboat was working, but the hardest part of the journey was still ahead. Life inside the Aquarius lifeboat was incredibly difficult. To save precious battery power, the crew had to turn off almost everything, including the heaters. The temperature inside the cabin plunged to just a few degrees above freezing. Water droplets condensed on the walls and floated around in the cold air. The astronauts were constantly cold and shivering. Sleep was almost impossible. They were also severely dehydrated. They had only a very limited supply of drinking water and they had to ration it carefully. They were exhausted, cold, and thirsty, but they had to stay sharp and focused. A new and deadly problem soon emerged. The lunar module was designed for 2 astronauts, so its system for removing carbon dioxide from the air was too small for 3 men. As the 3 of them breathed, the CO2 level began to rise to dangerous levels. High levels of CO2 can cause headaches, confusion, and eventually, death. The command module had plenty of spare CO2 removal canisters, but they were square. The canisters in the lunar module were round. They would not fit. It was a classic square peg in a round hole problem, but one with fatal consequences. Back on Earth, the team in Mission Control had to find a solution fast. They gathered all the items that the astronauts had available in the spacecraft cardboard, from a flight plan cover, plastic bags, duct tape, and a sock. Engineers on the ground worked frantically to design a makeshift adapter using only these materials. They tested their creation and then read the step-by-step instructions to the astronauts, who were 200,000 miles away. It was a brilliant piece of improvisation. The crew carefully built the device, which they nicknamed the mailbox, and it worked. The CO2 levels began to fall, and they could breathe safely again. This amazing feat of problem-solving showed the incredible ingenuity of both the crew and the ground team. They faced one impossible problem after another and found a way to overcome it. They had to manually steer their wobbly spacecraft to keep it on course. They had to live in miserable conditions, pushing their bodies and minds to the limit. Every hour was a struggle for survival. They were running out of power, water, and time. Their journey was a race against the clock, a testament to human resilience in the face of overwhelming adversity. The final hours of the journey were the most tense of all. The crew had to leave their lunar module lifeboat Aquarius and move back into the cold, dead command module Odyssey. This was their only way to survive the fiery re-entry through Earth's atmosphere. First, they had to bring Odyssey back to life. They used the instructions radioed up from Houston to carefully transfer the last remaining power from the lunar module to the command module's batteries. It was a complex and untested procedure. For a long time, the command module remained dark and silent. Then, one by one, the control panels flickered back to life. With Odyssey powered up, the crew said goodbye to their faithful lifeboat, Aquarius. They jettisoned it. And as it drifted away, Fred Haise said, "Farewell, Aquarius, and we thank you." They also jettisoned the damaged service module. For the first time, they saw the full extent of the damage. An entire panel was missing, and the inside was a mess of torn wires and twisted metal. It was a shocking sight that confirmed how close they had come to disaster. Now, only the small cone-shaped command module remained, their last hope for a safe return. The re-entry into Earth's atmosphere is always a dangerous phase of any space mission. The capsule travels at over 25,000 miles per hour, and the friction with the air creates a fireball outside the window. This intense heat creates a cloud of ionized particles that blocks all radio communication. This period is called the blackout. For Apollo 13, the blackout was expected to last about 4 minutes. The whole world waited. 4 minutes passed, then 5. The silence from space was deafening. In Mission Control, hearts pounded. Had they survived? Then, through the static, a voice was heard. It was the pilot of a recovery aircraft shouting, "Odyssey!" A moment later, the capsule's 3 main parachutes were spotted in the sky, huge orange and white canopies against the blue. A wave of relief and joy washed over Mission Control. Cheers and applause erupted. The astronauts had made it. They had survived the explosion, the cold, the thirst, and the fiery return. Their capsule splashed down safely in the Pacific Ocean, where a recovery ship was waiting. The impossible mission was over. The 3 men were home. After the crew was safely home, an investigation began to find out exactly what went wrong. The cause was traced back to a single oxygen tank, tank number 2. Years before the flight, during ground testing, the tank had been accidentally damaged. A heater inside it, designed to work at 28 volts in the spacecraft, was run on 65-volt ground power. This damaged the thermostat wiring. When Jack Swigert flipped the switch to stir the tank in space, this faulty wire created a spark, causing the insulation to catch fire in the pure oxygen environment. The resulting pressure surge blew the tank apart, crippling the spacecraft. The accident revealed that NASA had become a little too confident after its early successes. The investigation led to many changes to make the spacecraft safer. The oxygen tanks were completely redesigned to prevent a similar failure. A third emergency oxygen tank was added, along with an extra battery in the service module, completely separate from the main systems. These changes were a direct result of the lessons learned from Apollo 13. The near disaster forced NASA to re-examine every part of the Apollo spacecraft and its procedures, making future missions much safer for the astronauts who would fly them. The mission was a failure in that it never landed on the moon. The scientific goals were not achieved, but in another more important way, It was a spectacular success. It became known as the successful failure. It demonstrated the incredible skill and courage of the astronauts and the brilliant problem-solving abilities of the team on the ground. It showed that even when faced with an almost hopeless situation, humans could use their intelligence and teamwork to overcome it. The rescue of Apollo 13 is still studied today as a perfect example of crisis management. The cost of the Apollo program as a whole was immense, around $25 billion at the time, which is over $280 billion in today's money. After the drama of Apollo 13 and a few more successful landings, public interest waned again, and the government decided the money was needed for other things on Earth. The moon landing stopped with Apollo 17 in 1972. The incredible adventure seemed to be over, but the legacy of Apollo, and especially the story of Apollo 13, would continue to inspire people for generations to come, reminding us of what is possible when people refuse to give up.